Her mother is charged with murdering her 2 children. And just today, police released their mother's mugshot. Jamerria Hall is charged with murder. Now, we want to warn you, some of the details you're about to hear may be disturbing.
You wanted them new KFC wings, and you got them, right?
Yeah.
Then you come back to the house to say you hungry again.
We had buffalo wings.
So what did we go to America's Best and get?
We had...
It started with a scream. Not the kind you shrug off at night. This one cut through the quiet, like glass cracking under pressure. August 19th, 2021, just after 11:30 p.m. In a southwest Baltimore apartment building, a man jolted awake. He lived just 1 floor above. At first, it was muffled, shuffling, like someone moving furniture. Then came the sounds of something heavier. Thuds. And then, a child's voice. Mommy, no. Mommy, no, mommy.
I heard the kids around 11:30, and one kid said, Mommy, no, mommy, no, mommy.
He froze. He didn't know if he was imagining it. But what followed was worse. Nothing. No more cries. No footsteps. No doors opening. Just silence. The next morning, there was no police tape. No sirens. Just neighbors going about their day, completely unaware that 2 lives had just been taken below their feet. 5 days later, the smell started. It wasn't strong at first, just strange. But by the 5th day, it had spread down the hallway, into vents, under doors. Someone finally made the call. A maintenance worker arrived with a master key. When the door opened, he only stepped a few feet inside, and then backed out, fast, eyes wide, hands shaking. He called the police. And when officers arrived, they stepped into a scene that no one, not even seasoned investigators, would forget. In the middle of the living room, 8-year-old Davin Thomas, face down, zipped into a sleeping bag, a knife in his chest, a plastic trash bag cinched around his head. Down the hall, in the bathroom, his little sister, Jamerria, just 6, lying in the tub, strangled with a belt. Both children had been dead for days. The only person missing from that apartment was their mother, Jamerria Hall. And she wasn't hiding. She was wandering the streets of Baltimore, talking to herself, telling people that shadows were after her, telling her own mother she was in the hospital, telling others the kids were safe with their father. But no one had seen the kids since the night of those screams. Jamerria had fought for years to regain custody. She got her children back. And then she killed them, immediately. What happened inside that apartment? And why didn't anyone stop her before it was too late? Coventry Road didn't look like the kind of place that harbored a secret. It sat quietly in southwest Baltimore, part of a public housing complex most people drove past without a second glance. The buildings weren't new, but they were lived in, with basketball hoops nailed to telephone poles and plastic toys scattered across shared yards. On sunny days, 2 children could often be seen outside apartment 1106. A boy and a girl, Davin and Jamerria Thomas, 8 and 6. They were small for their ages, but full of life. Neighbors remembered Davin as the kind of boy who always asked before petting a dog, respectful, wide-eyed, quick to smile. Jamerria followed him everywhere, always holding a stuffed animal or doll. Her laugh? One of those little girl giggles that made even tired adults smile. The 2 of them stood out, not because they were loud, but because they radiated light. Even the neighborhood kids looked out for them. They were the sweet ones. You wouldn't find them fighting or talking back. They said please and thank you. They waved at people in the hallways. And when they weren't at school or outside playing, they spent a lot of time with their grandparents, Jamerria Hall's parents. Family members said those visits were filled with structure, warmth, and normalcy. But the children always returned to the apartment with their mother. To most, their mother, Jamerria Hall, was a quiet woman. She didn't cause trouble. She didn't party. She kept to herself. In her late 20s, Hall had 2 children and no partner visibly in the picture. Neighbors rarely saw her talk to anyone. She'd pass people in the stairwell without making eye contact. No wave, no smile. Just her, the kids, in that apartment. But no one thought much of it. People keep to themselves all the time. And from the outside, it looked like she was doing her best. She'd carry groceries in alone. To anyone passing by, she looked like a tired mom, not a dangerous one. But under the surface, something was shifting. And not quietly.
We're kindergartner. Hi, girl. Hi, second grader. Hi.
No one realized the warmth that surrounded Davin and Jamerria was starting to dim. Their smiles, once constant, became rarer. Their laughter, the kind that echoed down hallways, grew quiet. One neighbor noticed they stopped playing outside as often. Another said the little girl started looking tired. Inside, things were changing. Slowly at first, then all at once. But the children didn't tell anyone. They were loyal. They were young. They probably didn't know how to explain what was happening. And the adults around them, neighbors, teachers, even family, didn't know how close they were to losing them. Before the screams, before the silence, before the unbearable smell that forced open a door in Southwest Baltimore, there was a fire. September 2018, 3 years before anyone would find Davin and Jamerria lifeless. At that time, they were just children in their earliest memories. Davin was 5. Jamerria was 3. They were living with their mother, Jamerria Hall, inside her parents' home. It wasn't a perfect setup, but it was a roof. A place to regroup after what had already been a life marked by instability. Then one night, something changed. Hall's behavior had reportedly grown erratic in the weeks leading up to the fire. Arguments, isolation, strange mutterings. But it wasn't until the early morning hours that the true danger made itself known. Inside that house, someone had disabled every smoke detector. There were burned family photographs, blackened and curling at the edges. A frying pan had been left burning on the stove, its bottom scorched, flames licking toward the cabinets. And in the middle of the living room, a strange setup, a makeshift shrine of sorts. Photos arranged in a circle, candles, odd items stacked together. It wasn't just clutter. It was intentional, ritualistic, disturbing. The living room, kitchen, and hallway were beginning to fill with smoke. And still inside that house were 2 small children, Davin, Jamerria, asleep, with no warning system, and no protection. It could have been a double fatality. It nearly was. But neighbors noticed something. Smoke. And they called 911. Firefighters responded fast, kicking in the front door and dragging the children to safety. They suffered minor smoke inhalation, but they were breathing, shaken, but alive. When police questioned Jamerria at the scene, she was calm. Too calm. There was no panic, no visible concern for what had almost just happened. At first, she denied starting the fire. But the scene told a different story. And during questioning, her answers started to change. She told officers she believed someone was watching her. She said there were people following her. She talked about shadows, voices that wouldn't stop, voices that were warning her, voices that told her she and the children were in danger. And then, the next day, she vanished. She was out on bond, waiting for the legal system to decide what to do next. And suddenly, she was gone. She took Davin and Jamerria with her. A missing persons alert was issued. Authorities began a 2-day multi-agency search across Baltimore and the surrounding areas. The urgency wasn't just about a mother leaving town. It was about a woman who'd just tried to burn her house down, with 2 kids inside, now unaccounted for, mentally unstable and off the grid. Every hour that passed brought growing fear. Was she running? Was she planning something else? Were the children still alive? Then, unexpectedly, a lead came from a hospital. Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Staff at the Psychiatric Emergency Department recognized Hall and the children from news alerts. She had walked into the hospital, alone, carrying both kids. Disheveled, exhausted, eyes darting to the corners of the room. She told doctors she was in danger, that someone was poisoning her food, that people were watching her house. She claimed she had been followed. It didn't take long for clinicians to see that she was in the middle of a psychotic episode. Jamerria Hall was placed under psychiatric observation. Doctors diagnosed her with psychosis, characterized by hallucinations and paranoia. The episode had been building, they believed, for weeks, if not longer. As for Davin and Jamerria, they were physically unharmed. But emotionally, that was another story. They were placed temporarily with relatives. The Department of Social Services was notified, and for a brief moment, there was hope that the system might finally step in. In most stories, this is where the intervention begins, where real support steps in, where the system says, this woman needs help, and those children need protection. But that's not what happened. Hall stayed in psychiatric care for only a short time. Then she was released. The criminal process moved forward. Hall was charged with first-degree arson and child endangerment. In court, she entered a guilty plea. The result? 1 year in jail. That was it. No court-ordered psychiatric program. No structured outpatient treatment plan. No legal declaration that she was mentally unfit to raise children. She served her sentence. Quietly. And then, just months after her release, she went to court. After serving 1 year for setting fire to a home with her children inside, Jamerria Hall walked out of jail with a plan. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was heading straight back to court to get her children back. On paper, she did what was required. She completed anger management classes while incarcerated. She told the court she had found stable housing, a small apartment on Coventry Road, and she claimed she was now receiving mental health treatment. But claims don't equal proof. And in this case, nobody looked close enough. No one demanded a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation before restoring her parental rights. No one required long-term supervision. And most importantly, no one insisted on a formal treatment plan for the psychosis she had already been diagnosed with. The hearing didn't drag on. The children's father, Davin Thomas Sr., was present, but said nothing. Whether it was resignation, intimidation, or just fatigue, we may never know. But he didn't fight it. And without any formal objection, the judge signed off. Full custody, granted. Let that sink in. In 2018, the system removed Jamerria and Davin from their mother's custody to protect them. But in 2019, with little more than paperwork and vague assurances, the system gave them right back. There were no special conditions, no mental health monitoring, no required home visits beyond the standard. Just a quiet return to a mother whose last known crisis involved voices, fire, and 2 children almost lost. Child Protective Services had already been involved. They'd placed the children with family during Hall's psychiatric hold. They'd reviewed the fire, the charges, the missing person case. But when it came time to reassess custody, they backed away. According to later reports, the CPS file presented to the court was thin, acknowledging that Hall had complied with release conditions, but failing to include a detailed psychiatric risk assessment. There was no mandate for therapy, no requirement for medication compliance, no follow-up safety check once custody was restored. It was a closed file, not an open case. On the outside, it might have looked like a second chance, a mother putting her life back together, 2 kids coming home. But it wasn't a recovery. It was a reset. And beneath that reset, nothing had been addressed. The same mental illness, the same instability, now with no oversight. And those kids, those same smiling children who once ran down hallways and waved to neighbors, were back behind closed doors, inside an apartment with a mother who had almost killed them once, and who was already beginning to slip again. The court's signature on that custody order wasn't just a stamp of approval. It was a countdown. They returned Jamerria and Davin to the very person they once rescued them from. And this time, no one was watching. From the outside, apartment 1106 on Coventry Road looked just like the others. A plain door, a small stoop, nothing out of the ordinary. But behind that door, the atmosphere had shifted, and the warning signs were building, loud, visible, and ignored. It started small. Jamerria Hall stopped speaking to neighbors. Not that she was ever chatty, but now, even a polite nod was gone. She'd park her car in front of the building and just sit there, sometimes for hours, late into the night. Engine off, headlights off, just sitting. Neighbors would glance out their windows at 2, 3 a.m. and see her, alone, staring ahead, sometimes talking to herself. More than one resident noticed her lips moving, her head shaking slightly, like she was in an argument, but with no one else in the car. Then came something that made people stop and ask questions, quietly, in whispers.
One neighbor thought it was odd when he saw Hall throwing out the children's beds.
She threw out her children's beds. Both of them. One neighbor remembered watching her carry the mattresses down the stairs by herself. No moving truck. No replacements coming in. Just 2 small beds tossed beside the dumpster. It made no sense. People started asking each other, did the kids move out? Are they staying with family again? Have you seen them lately? Because suddenly, the children who used to wave from the window were nowhere to be seen. At school, the changes were recorded but not acted on. Davin and Denaria's attendance became irregular. Some days they showed up late. Other days, not at all. When they did come, they looked tired, withdrawn. Denaria stopped raising her hand in class. Davin, once curious and playful, started falling asleep at his desk. There were no reports of abuse, no bruises, no visible injuries. But there was a steady, silent withdrawal, the kind that builds when something is very wrong at home. And yet, there was no follow-up. No new CPS case was opened. No home visit was conducted, despite the fire in 2018, despite the psychiatric admission, despite the fact that these children had nearly died once before. No one was checking in. Why? By 2020, the pandemic had forced agencies to scale back in-person visits. Schools shifted to remote learning. CPS caseloads grew heavier, and families like Hall's, who didn't show up on the radar as immediate threats, quietly slipped between the cracks. To the system, they looked stable. On paper, nothing was urgent. But Hall was unraveling in slow motion. Neighbors would hear loud noises at night. Furniture being dragged, cabinets slamming, raised voices, pacing footsteps. Some said they heard a child crying. Others reported muffled arguments. But no one called the police. And when asked later why, most people said the same thing. It wasn't my place. I didn't want to interfere. She kept to herself. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that inside that apartment, a mental health crisis was reaching its breaking point. The hallucinations were returning. The paranoia, the voices she once told doctors about, they were back. But this time, there was no hospital, no one to intervene, no one to recognize that her mind had turned dangerous again. She was alone, and so were her children. What's staggering is not just what happened. It's how many people saw the pieces, but never put them together. The school saw withdrawal. The neighbors saw strange behavior. The building staff saw furniture tossed out. Family members noticed her growing more distant, less responsive to calls, harder to reach. But no one knew the full picture, because no one was looking at it. Everyone saw it, but no one intervened. Not until it was too late. August 19th, 2021. Security footage from the Coventry Road apartment complex captures one last, ordinary moment. The timestamp reads, just after 4:30 p.m. The camera watches as Jamerria Hall walks up the sidewalk toward her building. Trailing just behind her, Davin, 8 years old. Beside him, Denaria, only 6, holding a stuffed toy close to her chest. Davin looks tired, slower than usual. Hall turns back more than once, motioning for him to hurry up. There's no eye contact, no conversation, just a quiet procession up the steps and into the building. The door shuts behind them. That's the last confirmed time anyone would see them alive. Later that night, around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor is shaken from sleep. Not by sirens, not by alarms, but by the sound of screaming through the floorboards. He lies still, listening. At first it's just muffled thuds, then comes the voice. High-pitched, small, terrified. Mommy, no. Mommy, no, mommy. And then silence. No footsteps, no doors, no crying, just stillness. Over the next few days, the unit stays quiet. Too quiet. No one sees the kids. There are no toys outside. No lights on at night.
I heard a little boy through the floor was kind of crying. And right after that, I ain't heard anything else. I'm weeping. I'm weeping because the kid, she didn't have to kill them kids. She didn't have to do it.
Some neighbors start to notice a smell, faint at first. They wonder if it's something rotting in the trash room, maybe a dead animal in the wall. But by August 24th, The odor is unbearable. It's seeping under doors, into vents. A maintenance worker is sent to investigate apartment 1106. He knocks. No answer. He knocks again. Still nothing. Then, using the master key, he unlocks the door, takes one step inside, and stops. The heat hits first, then the smell, and then the body. Davin Thomas is on the floor of the living room, face down inside a child-sized sleeping bag. A kitchen knife is still lodged in his chest, and his head is wrapped in a plastic trash bag knotted around the neck. The maintenance worker backs out immediately, calls 911. Police arrive within minutes. As officers clear the apartment, they find Jamerria in the bathroom. She's in the tub, lying still, a belt wrapped around her neck, tight enough to bruise. The ligature's still in place. Both children are already in advanced stages of decomposition. The medical examiner would later confirm they had been dead for several days. The crime scene is unbearable, not just because of the smell or the decay, but because of the contrast. Inside the home are the signs of childhood. Tiny shoes by the door, coloring pages still taped to the fridge, a puzzle half finished on the coffee table. Everything frozen. Midlife, mid-laugh, mid-sentence. And now, 2 children were dead, and their mother was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood trail leading out, no struggle from the outside. This wasn't a break-in. This wasn't random. Whatever had happened inside apartment 1106 had come from inside. As the crime scene was processed, officers began piecing together the final hours. Witnesses confirmed no one had seen Hall since August 19th, the night of the screams. Her phone had been off, her car abandoned. One neighbor would later tell police he saw her just once afterward, wandering down the street days later, talking loudly to no one. She was alone, and the children were not with her. By August 24th, Hall had been completely off the grid for 5 days, and now detectives were racing to find her. The only person who might know what happened inside that apartment. The only person who could explain why 2 innocent children were murdered in their own home. In the days following the murders, Hall began laying a trail of deception, not to escape law enforcement, but to delay the questions. She called her own mother and told her she'd been admitted to the hospital, the University of Maryland Medical Center, she claimed. She said she'd had some kind of emergency surgery. That's why she wasn't answering calls. And the kids? She told her mother the children were with their father, Davin Thomas Sr. He'd picked them up, she said, and was watching them while she recovered. But none of that was true. When Hall's mother tried to visit her at the hospital, there was no record of any admission, no ER intake, no inpatient file, nothing. She tried calling Jamerria back. No answer. But even then, there was no alarm, not yet. Just frustration. People thought she was being irresponsible, maybe evasive. No one imagined she was already days removed from a double homicide. Meanwhile, Davin Thomas Sr. hadn't seen or heard from his children. He hadn't picked them up. He had no idea what Hall had told people. Then, around August 21st, 2 days after the murders, he saw her. By chance, she was walking alone in the middle of North Avenue, about 3 miles from the apartment. It was broad daylight. She was shouting to no one, gesturing, cursing. He pulled his car over, called her name, but Hall didn't acknowledge him, didn't even seem to recognize him. She kept yelling, something about people trying to poison her food, something about being watched. He tried again, tried to get her attention, but she turned suddenly and ran off between buildings. Gone again. At that point, he still didn't know what had happened to the kids. He drove to Coventry Road, knocked on the apartment door. No answer. He called her phone, over and over. No response. He didn't know it yet, but his children had been dead for 2 days. Over the next 3 days, Hall was seen wandering aimlessly across parts of Baltimore. One witness spotted her near Bloomingdale Road, muttering to herself. Another saw her pacing behind a convenience store. No kids, no bags, no clear destination. She wasn't running from police. She wasn't making plans to flee. She was disoriented, exhausted, and slipping further into a psychotic break. Then came the break investigators needed. August 25th, 2021, a day after the children were discovered. Police got a lead from a rideshare driver. He recognized Hall from news reports and said he'd recently dropped her off near Philadelphia Road and Rossville Boulevard. In Baltimore County, officers swarmed the area, and just after 8 p.m., they found her. She was hiding behind a dumpster. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She looked hollow. Her clothes were filthy. She carried a small bag with a water bottle, some loose change, and photographs of Davin and Jamerria, the last thing she was holding on to. She was taken to Baltimore Police Headquarters, processed, and placed in an interview room. The lights were bright, the air still. She sat quietly. No fidgeting, no tears. When detectives entered and read her rights, she didn't ask for a lawyer. She waived her Miranda rights and agreed to talk. And what she said chilled even the most seasoned officers in the room. She told them she'd killed Davin first, said he had been asleep, that she waited until the apartment was quiet, then walked over to where he lay on the floor, unzipped the sleeping bag just enough, and used a kitchen knife on him. She said he struggled, that he woke up, so she held him down, then used a plastic bag to stop him from screaming. He died in silence, but the noise woke Jamerria. The little girl got up and ran, screaming for help. "Mommy, no, Mommy." Hall said she chased her into the bathroom, cornered her, and ended her life there with a belt. There was no hesitation in the retelling, no emotion, no sorrow. One detective later described it as flat, like she was describing a trip to the store. When asked why she did it, Hall's answer was immediate. She said she'd been hearing voices, that shadows had been following her, whispering warnings, that people were trying to harm her children, that someone was after them. She said she was the only one who could protect them, and that killing them was the only way to save them. They weren't safe here anymore, she said. I didn't want them to suffer. To her, this wasn't murder. It was mercy. She believed she was doing what no one else could, rescuing her children from a fate worse than death. Investigators were stunned. This wasn't a fit of rage. It wasn't spontaneous. It was premeditated, methodical, controlled, and it came from someone who believed, deeply, that she was protecting the very children she killed. She showed no signs of remorse, no tears, no panic, only a dull conviction that what she had done was necessary. As the confession ended, detectives left the room and looked at each other, stunned. Not because of what she admitted to, they had already seen the bodies, but because of how she said it, because of what was missing from her voice. This wasn't a woman who wanted to escape blame. This was someone who truly didn't see herself as a criminal. In her mind, she wasn't a killer. She thought she was saving them. The confession was complete. The details were chilling. And there was no question about who was responsible for the murders of Davin and Jamerria Thomas. But the legal process? That would prove anything but straightforward. Jamerria Hall was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree child abuse resulting in death, and additional charges of first-degree assault and reckless endangerment. The charges were serious. Every one of them a reflection of the horror that unfolded inside apartment 1106. If convicted, she faced life in prison. But from the moment her case entered the courtroom, nothing moved quickly. Hall's public defender filed for a mental competency evaluation. The request was immediate and expected. After all, she had confessed to killing her children because shadows told her to. She claimed she heard voices, saw things no one else could see. That wasn't just criminal behavior. That was mental illness, if it could be proven. She was evaluated by a team of psychiatrists. And that's when the legal chaos began, because not all the doctors agreed. One report stated Hall suffered from schizophrenia with paranoid features, a chronic mental illness marked by delusions and hallucinations. According to that report, Hall was actively psychotic at the time of the murders, incapable of understanding that her actions were criminal. But other evaluations suggested something different. One psychiatric expert told the court that Hall was exaggerating her symptoms, possibly even faking them. He noted inconsistencies in her behavior during interviews, pointing out that she only displayed certain symptoms when being observed. When unmonitored, she appeared coherent, logical, even calm. To him, it looked less like a psychotic break and more like a calculated defense. The prosecution seized on that. They argued that Hall's actions after the murders, lying to her mother, telling people the kids were with their father, fabricating a hospital stay, were strategic, not delusional. A woman in psychosis, they said, wouldn't cover her tracks. They pointed to her confession as organized and lucid, not fragmented or incoherent. To them, it sounded like someone in control, not lost in madness. The defense pushed back hard. They said Hall had a documented history of mental illness, going back to the 2018 arson, when she was hospitalized for hallucinations and paranoia. They brought in medical records from Johns Hopkins, where she was diagnosed with psychosis after disappearing with her kids. They noted her history of delusions, her claims about poison, about being watched, about unseen threats. Their position was clear. She didn't kill her children out of hatred. She killed them because she was sick, and the system failed to treat her. While experts debated diagnoses, the legal process stalled. Court dates were set and delayed. Hearings were scheduled and rescheduled. Throughout 2022 and into 2023, the case bounced between courtrooms, hospital evaluations, and legal briefings. Part of the delay came from COVID-related backlogs, but most of it came from one central question the court couldn't resolve. Was Jamerria Hall criminally responsible for the murders of her children? More than a year passed with no resolution. The trial couldn't proceed without a ruling on her mental fitness. And with experts contradicting each other, judges were stuck. Some hearings were canceled because Hall wasn't transported from the Maryland Correctional Institution for women in time. Other delays were blamed on logistical problems with the court's new electronic filing system. The families and the public were left waiting and waiting. Each delay felt like a new wound for those still grieving. Each conflicting report cast more doubt on whether justice would ever be served. By the end of 2023, it was still unclear what would happen next. Would Hall go to trial? Would she be declared insane? Would she spend her life in a prison or in a psychiatric facility? No one had answers, and the system, once again, felt like it was cracking under pressure. By early 2024, the legal system had spent nearly 3 years circling a single question. Was Jamerria Hall criminally responsible for the murders of her children? 2 young lives were gone. The confession was on record. The cause of death was clear. But what wasn't clear, not to doctors, not to prosecutors, not even to the judge, was whether she understood what she was doing when she killed them. Then, in April 2024, the case took a turn. Hall entered a formal guilty plea to both counts of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse. But there was a catch. Her defense team made it clear. Hall wasn't pleading guilty to being sane. She was pleading not criminally responsible, Maryland's legal version of the insanity defense. She admitted to killing Davin and Jamerria, but she maintained that mental illness, not malice, drove her actions. Prosecutors didn't agree. They pointed again to her behavior after the murders. But by now, multiple psychiatric evaluations had reached a sobering consensus. Hall was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and at the time of the killings, she was deep in a psychotic break, unable to distinguish reality from delusion. In June 2024, the court made its final ruling. After reviewing medical evidence and expert testimony, the judge accepted the not criminally responsible defense. Jamerria Hall was not going to prison. Instead, she was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital for long-term treatment. She will remain under state supervision indefinitely. She will receive psychiatric care. She will be required to take medication. She will be barred from alcohol and illegal substances. And she will be continuously evaluated by mental health professionals. If, at any point, they determine she's no longer a threat to herself or others, she could be considered for release. But that decision will not come from a judge or a jury. It will come from medical staff. For many, the ruling felt like closure, but not justice. To Davin and Jamerria's family, the pain remained raw. They had watched the system return 2 children to a mother with a violent history and an untreated illness. And now, they were watching that same system declare her not criminally responsible for what came next. She admitted to killing them, said one relative. And now she doesn't have to pay for it? What kind of message does that send? Mental health advocates argued the opposite, that this was exactly what justice looks like when severe psychiatric illness is involved. They saw it as a system finally acknowledging that untreated psychosis can lead to tragedy, and that punishment without treatment would solve nothing. Either way, one thing was undeniable. Jamerria Hall would not spend a single day in prison for killing her 2 children. The case that had shocked Baltimore. The screams that echoed through floorboards. The bodies found after days of silence. Ended not with a sentence, but with a diagnosis. By the time Jamerria Hall stood in court again, asking for custody of her children, the case file looked complete. Completed classes, stable housing, compliance. But that's the problem. Our system is designed to check boxes, not ask deeper questions. No one asked, was the mental illness being treated? Were the hallucinations gone? Or just quiet? Was anyone still checking? Because on paper, it all looked better. And on paper, better can pass as safe. That's how custody was restored without a single condition for psychiatric supervision. That's how no coordinated safety plan was put in place. That's how there was no reevaluation, no in-home assessment once the kids were returned. No one followed up. No one followed through. Why? Because Hall didn't fit the image of a typical danger. She wasn't violent in public. She didn't threaten officials. She faded into the background, and the system rewards that. It doesn't know how to respond to quiet unraveling, to isolation, to slow declines that don't scream, but whisper. Even after the 2018 fire, no one pulled the thread. No agency connected her previous psychotic break to the new custody hearing. And because each office had only one slice of her story, no one ever saw the whole thing. That's not just oversight. That's a design flaw. The truth is, we build systems that respond to emergencies, not ones that prevent them. We act when things explode. But when someone's drowning silently in their own mind, we wait. And 2 children paid the price for that waiting. Everyone saw something. But no one connected the dots, and no one said the words that might have started a chain reaction. Something's not right, and maybe it wouldn't have changed the outcome. Maybe not, but maybe it would have. If this story stopped you in your tracks, if it made you feel something, then don't just scroll past. Subscribe to True Crime Undercover. These aren't just crime stories. They're warnings. Real lives, real systems, real silence. And we bring you the truths others overlook. No filters, no fluff. Hit the like button, tap the notification bell, and drop a comment below. Tell us, what would you have done if you heard those cries through the floor?